Alright, so this is a video that I wanted to make since end of July, but it didn't make sense for me to talk about a golden jacket when I didn't have a physical jacket with me. So the jacket arrived about 3 weeks ago and I did a video about that. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I actually did the exams and the lessons I learned during that exercise and some of the tips that might help you if you're planning to do the same. So if you're new to this channel, this is the kind of topics that I cover. I talk about software engineering, cloud and DevOps related areas. If you think those kind of videos are interesting, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I usually make a video once every week or 2 weeks. Now back to this video. So I'm not exactly a beginner in AWS or software engineering. I've been in the industry for about a decade and a half, and I've been working with AWS closely for about 7 years, and I think it has been about 10 years since first contact. And I also have some experience sitting for AWS certifications before. As of May this year, that was before I started this exercise, I had already sat for and passed 4 AWS certifications. So I was not a newcomer to any of those things. This is not a video about me starting from scratch and then getting through all the exams in 8 weeks. I don't think that's viable. I don't think that's necessarily going to help you if you're planning to do that. And in my day job, what I do is AWS cloud architecture. I'm a cloud architect by title, and most of the areas usually tested in some of the pro and associate level exams are stuff that I do on a day-to-day basis. So obviously me being able to go through this exercise and being able to do all of these exams in such a short period of time, I attribute that to the experience I have so far and also how familiar I am with AWS and its ecosystem. So if I was doing something else, say if I was coding all the time, I would not be able to do the same thing. This is mostly because I learn by doing, and I have kind of a working memory that is most useful, and I think this is how most people operate. But it is a lot more easier for me to get through an exam if the things that I'm getting tested on are the things that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. That doesn't mean that I didn't struggle in certain exams, especially with the exams that are to do with certain specialized area. That might be the first lesson in this exercise, that AWS exams do not necessarily reward experience across the board. Now, having experience certainly helps. It helps you to get through that baseline level of understanding that you should have for any kind of area, and without experience you would have to struggle a little bit to build that mental model that you would use later to stack more knowledge as you study. But having said that, certain questions in some of these exams are targeted with certain scenarios in mind. So what you would do in a real world situation might not be the actual answer in those cases. So for an example, in a real world situation, I go for Terraform instead of CloudFormation for various reasons that I don't want to go into in this video. But if that was a question in one of the AWS exams, I would go for the option with CloudFormation instead of third-party infrastructure as code tools, just because CloudFormation is an AWS product. So if I go with just my experience, that would certainly fail me in that situation. So basically you have to study for almost all exams, even if you are well experienced in most of these areas that the exams will test you on. Now about studying, I didn't spend a dime on anything that was useful to me during this exercise. Now yes, the exams themselves, they cost. You have to pay to sit for each exam, but I'm talking about third-party course providers here. I did buy a course from a third-party provider to study for the data engineering associate exam. Now data engineering is an area that I'm not really familiar with. I have done certain tasks in my previous roles when it comes to setting up engineering environments, but I have not really done data analysis and engineering as the primary job. So when I was going through this course material, I quickly understood that going through the course was a waste of my time, and also it could probably give me wrong information. Now hear me out, I'm not saying that every third-party course provider provides you with incorrect and useless information. I have used courses in the past, especially when I was not that experienced in working with AWS, and I would be lying if I said the courses had not been useful to me back then. I think where these courses are helpful is when you need to punch through some of those early lessons where you have to learn a lot of basic theory before you can actually start to piece together the information to build a useful mental model. And I think this is because how we think about learning, I think we tend to think about the process of learning as a structured approach where you need to first learn and understand the first principles before you can go for advanced activities. But in real world, I think it happens in a more unstructured manner. Just learning first principles when you start, that's not going to help you. I think an effective learning strategy is to do some activities blindly and then try to map the theory to what you just did. And that helps you build that mental model that will be useful later when you actually need to learn more advanced knowledge. What I'm struggling to say here is that sometimes you need to get done before you understand what you're actually doing. And I think a good structured course with someone who's really knowledgeable on how to teach certain things could help a beginner to get into this area without having to spend a lot of time going through some of the mundane lessons as theory. Having said that, I think these courses start to become useless the moment you start gaining some experience working with AWS. The moment you start building an effective mental model, these third-party courses will not be that useful, especially with respect to the time and the money you're expected to spend on these things. I don't think this is the case for every third-party course provider. I certainly think there are really good educators out there outside of AWS that dedicate a lot of time into building course material that helps beginners in a meaningful manner. But I find that most third-party course providers tend to repeat what the AWS documentation has, and most of the time in presentation slide format. I think when it comes to teaching, using slides is the most boring way of doing things, and it's the easiest way to lose attention from someone who's a beginner in this area. And what's worse is these course materials tend to expire pretty quickly, especially when it comes to AWS, because AWS keeps on releasing new features, new services every year. If the course provider doesn't spend a lot of time maintaining their course materials, you're going to soon end up with something that is incorrect and out of date. And unfortunately, as I have found, most course providers don't really spend a lot of time maintaining their courses. I have personally seen straight up wrong information being taught to newcomers as gospel. Now, in my opinion, there's a better way of learning, especially when it comes to AWS. My suggestion here is going to involve a lot more time that should be invested instead of following a course, but it's going to get you the most correct information when it comes to studying AWS material. What I think you should do to prepare for these AWS exams is to just study by yourself. Now, that's not probably the groundbreaking lesson that you are waiting for in this part, but it is simple as that. For every certification, AWS provides an exam guide. That exam guide contains details of the areas that the exam will cover, and almost all the time this exam guide is enough to get an idea about what areas you should study for each exam. Now, keep in mind that I am talking about someone who's already a little bit experienced in working with AWS. You don't have to have a lot of years of experience here, but you need to be able to understand where certain things fit together when it comes to looking up documentation. So my suggestion here is that you go through the exam guide and Google for every sentence or phrase that you come across in that guide. So when you do that, you might come across links to AWS documentation on AWS services, or AWS blog posts, or even documentation on solution architectures that AWS proposes as best practices. What's important here is that you're directly referring to the source of truth when it comes to what to study for each certification, and you are also using primary sources from AWS when it comes to studying those concepts. Now, the downside here is that it takes a bit of time for you to do this. You need to be able to go through documentation, read and understand those topics, and you might also need to go and read other sources to understand certain basic concepts that you might not have experience on. On the other hand, if you go through a course, that still takes some time. Most of these courses are in a video format, so you have to sit through those videos anyway. So I don't think you're trading that much of time between these options. Now, one thing you can add here to enhance your learning is to use the free material that is available in AWS Skill Builder. For each certification, AWS provides free resources for preparing for that exam, and also a free practice exam that you can take to understand where you are relative to what's being tested in the exam. Skill Builder has more advanced courses and advanced practice exams under a paid subscription, but I didn't use that mostly because I didn't have access to the subscription my company had. The preparation course in Skill Builder free version lets you know what areas to focus on when you are studying, and also how to answer questions in a structured manner. To recap, what I propose instead of paying for third-party courses is to study for yourself, use the exam guide, study the documentation, use the exam preparation course, and also the practice exam that is available in Skill Builder. You can use the Skill Builder paid version, but it totally depends on the budget you can allocate for this exercise. Now, speaking about paying things, I have a little story. I have a friend who is part of one of the Women in Tech programs that aims to build up newcomers in cloud technology and help them find careers. And these communities tend to be composed of different types of people around the world with different backgrounds. And my friend used to show me one of the people that like to repeat this kind of myth, in my opinion, that says you have to spend dollars if you needed to get a proper education. Dollars is the exact word. This is something I really don't agree with, especially in this day and age. Now, AWS exams cost a lot. The exam fee for professional exams are somewhere around $300 US. So if you're from one of the countries with a disadvantageous exchange rate, like I was until a few years ago, you're not going to have a lot of economic freedom when it comes to spending for the actual education itself. If you are getting paid by US dollars, it's easy to spend US dollars. But if you're getting paid by a currency that takes hundreds of it to pay for $1, then spending somewhere around 100 or 150 US dollars on a course itself is not going to be viable. This is why I'm making this video, to show that I didn't spend a dime on learning myself. Of course, there was that one course that I bought, but I could ignore it for learning the lesson that I don't need courses anymore. So if you see someone propagating this idea that you need to spend to study for certifications, that is not the case anymore. There are free resources, and I just explained one approach that you can take for AWS exams. Now, when it comes to the actual scope of these exams, you will find that there's a common baseline knowledge that you should have for every exam. Now, this is a combination of software engineering basics, cloud computing basics, cloud storage, cloud networking basics like VPCs, subnets, and then identity and access management, things like IAM and SSO services. How deep you should understand these areas depend on the type of exam you're taking, but there's a common level of understanding you should have if you intend to do these exams in a very short period of time. So if you don't have a strong grasp of these areas, if you don't have a really good mental model of how these areas work together in the cloud, then the first thing you should do is to spend some time to build that strong foundation. They should be first-class citizens of the mental model of the cloud you have in your mind. Everything else is specialization for each exam. The other lesson that I learned was that the order of the exams could be interesting too. I roughly planned to get the associate exams done first, so I'd be able to get through some of the easy ones and build some confidence before I go into the pro and specialty exam. I started with the solution architect associate exam and went through all the associate ones in about 3 weeks, and then I went over to the specialty exams. I first did the security specialty just because I thought that would be the easiest specialty exam. Now, in my day-to-day work, thinking about security when it comes to architecting solution is a must. So most of the services and areas that the security specialty tests you on are familiar to me. And then I found out the specialty exams on SAP and database management had been retired, so that was a huge relief for me. I had sworn that I would never work on anything SAP related, but luckily I didn't have to go through the actual exam. I got the cloud practitioner exam done while I was waiting for the solution architect professional exam date to come up. Now, solution architect professional isn't easy, but it's not hard for me as well. My day job is essentially the exam scope, so I should be able to pass it without any issues. The specialty exam on advanced networking was maybe the hardest AWS certification that I have done so far. I spent all the 3 hours allocated to the exam, and I have never done that before the advanced networking one. Completing the advanced networking specialty exam was enough for me to get the golden jacket, but I went ahead and did the DevOps professional exam as well, just because I didn't want the qualifications to expire soon after getting the jacket. The only exam that I didn't do during these months was the machine learning specialty exam. I had already done that 2 years ago, and it wasn't expiring anytime soon. After I got notified that I qualified for the jacket, AWS released 2 beta exams. I went ahead and did these 2 as well, just so that I would have the bragging rights to say that I have done all the exams. Now, when it comes to answering the questions in these exams, there is an assumption of detail that you should have for different levels of these certifications. What I mean by an assumption of detail is the level of depth you should think about when you are given a question. There's a difference in depth of the thinking that you should do between a question from the solution architect associate exam and a question from solution architect professional exam. If you overthink certain details in the beginner exams like cloud practitioner and some of these associate level exams, there's a chance that you might end up with the wrong answer, local minima of reasoning, if you just focus on the wrong detail. This is because these questions are created by subject matter experts, and while they are really knowledgeable about these areas, they are not 100% perfect. So some of the answers might be really similar, and there might be several correct answers if you go down the wrong path of reasoning. Now, between these AWS exams, I also scheduled and did 2 Kubernetes related exams, Kubernetes and Cloud Native Associate and Kubernetes and Cloud Native Security Associate exams. These are foundational exams, and I didn't spend a lot of time studying for them. I found some time between the AWS exams because the exam centers in my city did not have slots close enough for me to get through them quickly. Now, that's another lesson I could probably provide here. Always do your AWS certification exams at exam centers. You could do them at home, but it's a lot more stress to set up and make sure that things don't go wrong when it comes to connectivity, electricity, and also other factors that you don't really control. Now, if you go to an exam center and things are not right, there's a party that you can put the responsibility on. But if you do exams at home, you are on your own. And that's a lot of stress that you don't want during these AWS exams. Now, speaking of stress, I don't intend to do this exercise ever again. Doing a lot of exams in a very short period of time isn't new to me. This is basically what I used to do, juggling a lot of mandatory and optional subjects in the university. But doing that while being full-time employed is not a great experience. You have to dedicate almost all of your free time studying and preparing for the exams, so you don't get a lot of downtime between the workdays you would otherwise have if you didn't do this exercise. So it adds up to a lot of stress at the end. If you don't have a supporting team at work, this is going to be an unpleasant experience. Luckily, I did have people at work who understood what I was doing, so that was really helpful for me to manage the extra stress when it comes to working and studying. If you're watching this video, chances are you are doing a job that requires for you to focus fully on the job. The type of jobs that you do probably can't be done on autopilot. So after 8 hours of working, if you transition into the study mode, that is a lot of stress on the brain, and if you do all of these exams in a very short period of time, that stress adds up. I did get close to symptoms of burnout, and even my thought patterns were different. There's this one dream I had around the time I did the last exam, where I was trying to answer a multiple choice question on what kind of groceries to buy. So basically I was dreaming about my grocery list, but in a multiple choice question format. That's how deep I was in that thinking pattern. And if you have a lot of hobbies, you're not going to be able to get to them, especially if those hobbies are the kind of stuff that gets spread out over a few days. So for an example, if you do woodworking, you would find yourself not being able to commit to long-term projects, not because you don't have enough time for the exams, just because you can't manage that context switching between the work, the free time, and the time that you need to commit for studying. So with all of that, why did I do it? Why did I choose to do all of these exams in such a short period? Number one was a practical reason. I did not want to spend a lot of time in exam mode. I wanted to get all of these exams done in the shortest time as much as possible, and I did not want to spend more than a couple of weeks in that study mode. I just don't thrive in that mentality. Also, on the other hand, getting perfect marks was an on goal, so I knew I just had to find the right balance of spending as little time as possible on studying but still sitting for the exams with enough confidence, knowing that I would pass the exam. And the other major reason doesn't really make sense. It's just a personal way of looking at things. I just wanted to see if I could get through that challenge. I wanted to see where I would break in such a scenario, and I think I saw the break point at a distance, and I decided to turn back. Having said that, what I recommend as a study plan for such an exercise would be to spread out these exams within a period of say 6 to 12 months. Almost all of these exams are valid for 3 years once you pass them, so you don't really have to rush through like I did if you plan to get all of those exams done and qualify for, let's say, a golden jacket. So you comfortably have about 2.5 years to do all of these exams, but on the other hand, spending 2.5 years on just on and off exam mode is not my idea of fun. So there's probably that sweet spot between 6 to 12 months of relaxed studying for all of these exams. So these are sort of the lessons and tips that I learned during that exercise. I hope these are useful to you in a general sense if you aim to do all of these exams and aim for the golden jacket. If you do have questions, let me know in the comments. Also, if this video helped you in any way, don't forget to like. That interaction helps the channel a lot. This kind of topics are not the homepage materials, so users interacting with the video indicates to the algorithm that the video could be suggested to more people. That said, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.